The shrill ring of my phone pierced through the fog of my grief. I glanced at the caller ID and felt my stomach clench. Linda. My mother-in-law's timing was as impeccable as ever. "Claire, darling, I need you here by 6. The caterers are hopeless, and Jack's cousins are arriving early." Linda's voice crackled through the speaker, sharp and demanding. I closed my eyes, fighting back tears. "Linda, I can't. My mother's funeral is tomorrow, and Oh, that's right," she cut me off, her tone dismissive. "Well, surely you can spare a few hours. Family obligations don't stop for these things, you know." My jaw dropped. "These things? Linda, my mother just died. And I'm terribly sorry for your loss, dear, but life goes on, doesn't it? We can't all wallow in misery. Now, I expect you here at 6 sharp. Wear something presentable, not those awful jeans you insist on parading around in." The line went dead before I could respond. I stared at the phone, a mixture of disbelief and anger coursing through me. How dare she? How could anyone be so callous? I was still fuming when Jack walked in, his brow furrowing at the sight of my face. "Claire, what's wrong?" "Your mother," I spat, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. "She wants me at the house by 6 to help with some family gathering. Apparently, my mother's death isn't a good enough excuse to skip out on family obligations." Jack's face darkened. "She what? No, absolutely not. I'll call her right now and—" "Don't bother," I sighed, suddenly feeling exhausted. "You know how she is. It'll only make things worse." He sat beside me on the couch, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. "I'm so sorry, Claire. I'll talk to her, I promise. You don't have to go." I leaned into him, grateful for his warmth. "I know, it's just... Why does she have to be like this? Especially now?" "Because she's Linda," Jack said, a hint of bitterness in his voice. "She's never known how to be anything else." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of everything pressing down on us. I thought about my mother, about the empty space she'd left behind. And then, unbidden, Linda's voice echoed in my head again. "Family obligations don't stop for these things." "Maybe I should go," I said quietly. Jack pulled back, looking at me in surprise. "What, Claire? No, you don't owe her anything, especially not now." "I know, but—" I trailed off, struggling to put my feelings into words. If I don't go, she'll never let me hear the end of it. And right now, I can't deal with that on top of everything else. Jack's face softened with understanding. "Okay, if that's what you want to do, I'll support you. But I'm coming with you and we're not staying long." I nodded, feeling a small spark of gratitude amidst the grief. At least I wouldn't have to face Linda alone. As we got ready to leave, I caught sight of myself in the mirror. My eyes were red-rimmed, my face pale and drawn. I looked exactly like what I was, a woman who had just lost her mother. Linda's words echoed in my mind again. "Wear something presentable." With a sudden burst of defiance, I grabbed my favorite pair of worn jeans from the closet. If Linda wanted me there so badly, she'd have to take me as I was, grief, jeans and all. As we drove to Linda's house, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. Little did I know just how right I was. As we pulled up to Linda's sprawling mansion, I felt Jack's hand squeeze mine. "We can still turn back," he said, his voice soft but firm. I shook my head, steeling myself. "No, let's just get this over with." The moment we stepped inside, Linda descended upon us like a perfectly coiffed vulture. Her eyes narrowed at my jeans, but before she could comment, Jack intervened. "Mom, we can't stay long. Claire's mother's funeral is tomorrow, remember?" Linda waved a dismissive hand. Yes, of course, but surely you can spare a few hours for family, Claire." The way she said family made my skin crawl. I bit back a retort, reminding myself why we were here. Keep the peace. Don't make waves. As Linda whisked Jack away to greet some relatives, I found myself alone in the bustling living room. Memories flooded back, our first Christmas here as newlyweds. Tense arguments with his mother, the constant pressure to conform to Linda's idea of the perfect family. "Claire, dear," Linda's voice cut through my thoughts. "Be a darling and help with the hors d'oeuvres, won't you?" I gritted my teeth and headed to the kitchen, where I found Jack's father, Robert, looking lost among platters of fancy finger foods. "Claire," he said, relief evident in his voice. "Thank goodness. I haven't the faintest idea what I'm supposed to do with all this." I couldn't help but smile. Robert had always been kind to me, a calm presence in the storm of Linda's expectations. "Don't worry. I've got this. Why don't you go rescue Jack from Linda's clutches? He chuckled, patting my shoulder as he left. You're a saint, Claire. Don't let Linda push you around too much. Okay? If only it were that easy. As I arranged the platters, my mind wandered back to my college days with Jack. We'd been so carefree then, dreaming of a future together. Jack had been determined to forge his own path, away from his mother's influence. But somehow, over the years, Linda had wormed her way back in, her tendrils of control tightening around our lives. Claire! Linda's sharp voice jolted me back to reality. What on earth are you doing? Those canapés go on the silver tray, not the gold one. I closed my eyes, counting to 10. Sorry, Linda. I'll fix it right away. See that you do, she sniffed. Really, Claire, it's not that difficult. Sometimes I wonder what Jack sees in you. The words stung more than I cared to admit. As I rearranged the canapés, I caught sight of Jack across the room, deep in conversation with his cousin. He looked up, our eyes meeting, and I saw a flicker of concern cross his face. Just then, Linda's voice rang out again. Everyone, gather round! Jack has some exciting news to share. My heart dropped. News? What news? Jack made his way to the center of the room, looking uncomfortable. Mom, I don't think now is the time. Nonsense, Linda beamed. Go on, tell everyone about your promotion. Promotion? This was the first I'd heard of it. I watched, a knot forming in my stomach, as Jack reluctantly addressed the room. Well, I've been offered a position as head of software development, he said, his eyes darting to me apologetically. It's a great opportunity, but nothing, Linda interrupted. It's wonderful news. Of course, you'll have to move to New York, but I'm sure Claire won't mind, will you, dear? All eyes turned to me. I stood there, frozen, platters of canapés forgotten in my hands. Move to New York? Leave behind everything, my job, my friends, my mother's memory. Just as I was grappling with her loss, the room spun around me. I saw Jack's panicked face, heard Linda's triumphant voice, felt the weight of expectations crushing down on me. And then, for the first time in years, I did something I'd never dared to do before. I said no. The room fell silent, all eyes fixed on me. I could feel the weight of their stares, but it was Linda's gaze that burned the hottest. What did you say? She hissed, her perfectly painted smile faltering. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. I said no, Linda. We're not moving to New York. Jack was at my side in an instant, his hand on my arm. Claire, You didn't even tell me about this, I said, turning to him. Were you planning on making this decision without me? Linda's laugh cut through the tension like a knife. Oh, Claire, don't be silly. Of course Jack was going to tell you. He just wanted to surprise you with the good news. I felt my resolve hardening. Good news? My mother just died, Linda. I'm burying her tomorrow, and you want me to uproot my entire life? A collective gasp rippled through the room. Linda's face flushed red, her eyes narrowing. Now, Claire, there's no need to make a scene. We can discuss this later in private. No, I said, my voice stronger now. We'll discuss it now. I'm tired of pretending everything's fine when it's not. I'm tired of your constant criticism and your impossible expectations. Jack squeezed my arm. Claire, maybe we should. Let her speak, son, Robert's voice cut in. He stepped forward, placing a hand on my shoulder. Go on, Claire. Say what needs to be said. Linda's eyes flashed dangerously. Robert, don't encourage this nonsense. But I was beyond stopping now. Years of pent-up frustration came pouring out. You've never respected me, Linda. Never accepted me as part of this family. You've criticized everything, from my clothes to my job to the way I fold napkins. And now, when I'm grieving my mother, you expect me to just fall in line with your plans? The room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Linda's face had gone from red to white, her lips pressed into a thin line. How dare you? She sputtered. After everything I've done for you, for this family. What you've done, I interrupted, is try to control every aspect of our lives. You've pushed and manipulated and bullied until Jack and I barely recognize our own relationship anymore. I turned to Jack, tears stinging my eyes. And you've let her do it. You promised me when we got married that we'd make our own path. But look at us now. We're right back under her thumb. Jack looked stricken. Claire, I never meant... I didn't realize. Linda's voice cut through, sharp as a razor. That's quite enough. I will not stand here and be insulted in my own home. Claire, if you can't behave civilly, perhaps it's best you leave. I laughed, a hollow sound even to my own ears. You're right about one thing, Linda. I should leave, but not just this party. I'm leaving this toxic situation for good. I turned to Jack, my heart breaking. I love you, but I can't do this anymore. I won't be second to your mother's wishes. When you're ready to stand up to her, to choose our life together over her plans for you, you know where to find me. With that, I walked out, leaving a stunned silence in my wake. As I reached the front door, I heard footsteps behind me. Claire, wait! It was Robert. He pressed something into my hand, a small, worn book. Your mother gave me this years ago. I think you should have it now. I looked down at the book, recognizing my mother's handwriting. Before I could respond, Robert squeezed my shoulder. You're stronger than you know, Claire. Don't let anyone dim your light. As I walked away from the house, clutching my mother's book, I felt a mix of terror and exhilaration. I had no idea what came next, but for the first time in years, I felt like I was finally standing up for myself. I clutched my mother's book to my chest as I stumbled into my childhood home. The silence was deafening, a stark reminder of the life that had been extinguished. I collapsed onto the worn sofa, my body racked with sobs I'd been holding back for days. As my tears subsided, I opened the book Robert had given me. A folded piece of paper fluttered out, my mother's elegant handwriting immediately recognizable. With trembling hands, I unfolded it. My dearest Claire, it began. If you're reading this, I'm no longer with you. There's so much I need to tell you, things I should have said long ago. I devoured her words, learning of a life I'd never known she'd lived. My mother, Elizabeth Johnson, wasn't just the quiet librarian I'd grown up with. She was Elizabeth J. Blackwood, the reclusive author of a beloved series of novels. She'd written under a pseudonym to protect our privacy, to give me a normal life. The revelation left me reeling. My mother, the woman I thought I knew so well, had been living a double life all this time. And now, with her gone, I was left to grapple with this new reality alone. My phone buzzed incessantly, Jack's name flashing on the screen. I ignored it, too overwhelmed to deal with him or Linda or any of it right now. Instead, I dove back into my mother's letter, drinking in every word, every secret she'd kept hidden. As dawn broke, I was startled by a knock at the door. Exhausted and emotionally drained, I opened it to find Jack standing there, his face a mask of concern and regret. Claire, he said softly, I've been worried sick. Can we talk? I hesitated, then stepped aside to let him in. He took in my tear-stained face, the scattered papers around me, and the book clutched in my hand. What's all this? He asked. I took a deep breath. It's my mother's life, the one I never knew about. I handed him the letter, watching as his eyes widened in surprise. Elizabeth J. Blackwood? Your mother was, but how? Why didn't you ever say anything? Because I didn't know, I said, my voice cracking. She kept it from everyone, even me. And now she's gone, and I have all these questions I'll never get to ask her. Jack reached for me, but I stepped back. Claire, I'm so sorry. About everything. I should have told you about the job offer. I should have stood up to my mother. I've been a coward, and I've let you down. I nodded, too tired to argue. Yes, you have, but right now I can't think about that. My mother's funeral is in a few hours, and I need to focus on saying goodbye. Jack's face fell. Of course. I understand, but please let me be there for you. Let me support you through this. Before I could respond, my phone rang. It was Linda. I stared at the screen, feeling a familiar mix of dread and obligation. Don't answer it, Jack said firmly. You don't owe her anything, especially not today. I looked at him, surprised by the steel in his voice. Jack? I mean it, Claire. I'm done letting my mother control our lives. Today is about you and your mom. Nothing else matters. As if on cue, the phone stopped ringing, only to start again almost immediately. Linda's persistence knew no bounds. I stood there, torn between the ingrained need to please and the desire to honor my mother's memory. Jack's words echoed in my mind, mingling with the revelations from my mother's letter. I thought about the strong, independent woman who had raised me, who had lived a secret life as a celebrated author. What would she want me to do? With a deep breath, I made my decision. I picked up the phone, my finger hovering over the answer button. This moment, I realized, would define not just this day, but the course of my life going forward. Whatever choice I made, there would be no going back. I looked at Jack, then down at my mother's book, and finally at Linda's name flashing on my phone screen. It was time to take control of my own story. The church was filled with a somber silence, broken only by muffled sobs and the gentle rustling of clothing. I stood at the podium, my mother's book clutched tightly in my hands, trying to find the words to say goodbye. My mother was. I began, my voice cracking. I cleared my throat and started again. My mother was more than just a librarian. She was Elizabeth J. Blackwood, the author who touched so many lives with her words. A collective gasp rippled through the congregation. I saw confusion, surprise, and dawning recognition on many faces. I pressed on, drawing strength from the truth I was finally able to share. She kept this part of herself hidden to protect our family, to give me a normal life. But in doing so, she denied herself the recognition she deserved. Today, I want to honor not just the mother I knew, but the incredible woman she truly was. As I continued my eulogy, I felt a sense of peace washing over me. I was giving my mother the tribute she deserved, acknowledging both the woman who raised me and the artist who had touched so many lives. Just as I was finishing, I saw movement at the back of the church. Linda was there, her face a mask of determination. She caught my eye and gestured urgently for me to come outside. I felt a familiar knot of anxiety form in my stomach. I stepped down from the podium, squeezing Jack's hand as I passed him. "I'll be right back," I whispered. Outside, Linda was pacing impatiently. "Claire, darling, I know this is a difficult time, but we really must discuss the family gathering. Everyone's expecting you and—" I held up a hand, cutting her off. "Linda, I'm in the middle of my mother's funeral. Whatever it is, it can wait." Her eyes narrowed. "Now, Claire, I've been very patient with all this unpleasantness. But family obligations don't just disappear because you're feeling emotional. You need to pull yourself together and think about what's best for everyone." I stared at her, incredulous. "What's best for everyone? My mother just died, Linda. I'm grieving. The only thing I need to think about right now is honoring her memory." Linda's face hardened. "I see. Well, if that's how you feel, perhaps it's best if you don't come to the gathering at all. We wouldn't want your mood to bring everyone down." Something inside me snapped. Years of pent-up frustration and resentment came pouring out. "You know what, Linda? You're right. I won't be coming to your gathering. Not today. Not ever again. I'm done letting you dictate my life and make me feel small." She gasped, taking a step back. "How dare you speak to me like that? After everything I've done for you and Jack." "Everything you've done?" I laughed bitterly. "You've done nothing but try to control us, to mold us into what you think we should be. Well, I'm not playing that game anymore." Just then, Jack appeared at the church door. "Claire, is everything okay?" His eyes widened as he took in the scene before him. Linda turned to him, her voice syrupy sweet. "Jack, darling, please talk some sense into your wife. She's being terribly unreasonable." I held my breath, watching Jack's face. This was it, the moment of truth. Would he stand with me, or cave to his mother's demands as he had so many times before? Jack looked between us, his jaw set. Then, to my surprise and relief, he moved to stand beside me. "Mom, I think you should leave. Now." Linda's mouth fell open in shock. "Jack! You can't possibly." "I can, and I am," he said firmly. "Claire is my wife, and this is her mother's funeral. Your behavior is completely unacceptable. If you can't respect that, then you need to go." As Linda sputtered and protested, Jack gently guided me back towards the church. "Come on, Claire. Let's go say goodbye to your mom." With one last look at Linda's stunned face, I turned and walked back into the church, feeling lighter than I had in years. As we took our seats, Jack squeezed my hand. "I'm so sorry it took me this long to stand up to her," he whispered. "But I promise you, things are going to be different from now on." I nodded, tears in my eyes. As the service resumed, I felt a mix of grief and hope. My mother was gone, but perhaps, in losing her, I had finally found the strength to reclaim my life. I stood at the entrance of Linda's lavish home, my black mourning dress a stark contrast to the cheerful decorations and the sound of laughter spilling out from inside. Jack squeezed my hand, his face a mix of concern and determination. "We don't have to do this," he said softly. "We can turn around right now." I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "No, we need to face this. It's time to put an end to all of it." As we stepped inside, the chatter died down, replaced by a wave of hushed whispers. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, taking in my tear-stained face and somber attire. Linda appeared suddenly, her smile brittle and forced. "Claire, Jack, you made it," she trilled, as if we were arriving fashionably late to a cocktail party, rather than coming straight from a funeral. "Everyone, look who's here!" The room fell into an uncomfortable silence. I could see the confusion and shock on people's faces, their gazes darting between my grief-stricken appearance and Linda's forced cheer. Linda, oblivious or willfully ignoring the tension, continued, "Claire, darling, why don't you go freshen up? You look absolutely dreadful. There's a lovely dress in the guest room that would be much more appropriate for the occasion." I felt Jack stiffen beside me, but before he could speak, I found my voice. "No, Linda, I won't be changing. I've just come from burying my mother, and I won't pretend otherwise for your comfort or anyone else's." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Linda's smile faltered for a moment before she recovered. "Now, Claire, there's no need to be dramatic. We all understand you're upset, but life goes on. Your mother wouldn't want you to wallow, would she?" Something inside me snapped. All the years of biting my tongue, of trying to please this woman who had never shown me an ounce of genuine kindness, came rushing to the surface. "You have no idea what my mother would have wanted," I said, my voice low but clear. "You never bothered to know her, or me for that matter. All you've ever cared about is appearances and control." Linda's face flushed red. "How dare you speak to me like that in my own home, after everything I've done for you?" "Everything you've done?" I laughed bitterly. "You've done nothing but criticize and belittle me from the day I married Jack. You've tried to control every aspect of our lives, to mold us into your perfect vision of what a family should be. Well, I'm done. I won't let you dictate my life or my grief any longer." The room was dead silent now, all eyes riveted on the unfolding drama. I could see Jack's father, Robert, watching with a mix of surprise and what looked like pride. Linda, her composure completely shattered, turned to Jack. "Are you going to let her speak to me like this? After all I've sacrificed for you?" Jack stepped forward, placing a protective arm around me. "Mom, that's enough. Claire is right. Your behavior has been unacceptable, not just today, but for years. It stops now." Linda's eyes widened in disbelief. She looked around the room, seemingly searching for an ally, but found only uncomfortable and averted gazes. "Well," she said, her voice trembling with rage, "if that's how you both feel, perhaps it's best if you leave. I won't have my own son and his wife disrespecting me in front of our friends and family." I felt a moment of triumph, quickly followed by a wave of exhaustion. This confrontation, on top of the emotional toll of the funeral, was more than I could bear. I turned to Jack, ready to leave, when a voice cut through the tension. "Elizabeth Johnson's daughter? Is that really you, Claire?" I froze, recognizing the name my mother had written under. Slowly, I turned to face an elderly woman I vaguely recognized as one of Linda's friends. Yes, that was my mother's pen name. How did you?" The woman's eyes lit up with recognition and excitement. "Oh, my dear, I've been a fan of your mother's books for years. I had no idea she was Linda's daughter-in-law. This is extraordinary." As murmurs of surprise and interest rippled through the crowd, I saw Linda's face drain of color. The revelation hung in the air, a game-changing moment that threatened to upend everything. I stood there, caught between grief, anger, and a strange sense of vindication, knowing that the next few moments would change the course of my life forever. The room erupted into a cacophony of voices, everyone talking at once. I stood there, frozen, as the elderly woman approached me, her eyes shining with admiration. "My dear, your mother's books were simply magnificent." The silent whisper changed my life. To think, all this time, she was right here in our midst. I felt a surge of pride mixed with an overwhelming sadness. "Thank you," I managed to say. She never told anyone. I only found out after she passed." The woman's face fell. "Oh, you poor thing, and to think, Linda made you come here today of all days." All eyes turned to Linda, who stood rigid, her face a mask of fury and embarrassment. I had no idea," she stammered. "Claire never said anything about her mother being a writer." "Because I didn't know," I shot back, finding my voice again. "And even if I had, would it have mattered to you? Would you have treated me any differently?" The room fell silent, the tension palpable. Jack stepped forward, his face a mix of anger and determination. "Mom, how could you do this? How could you drag Claire here on the day of her mother's funeral?" Linda's eyes darted around the room, searching for an ally and finding none. Even her closest friends were looking at her with shock and disappointment. I was just trying to maintain our family traditions, she said weakly. Claire knows how important these gatherings are. Robert, who had been silent until now, stepped forward. Linda, that's enough. What you've done is inexcusable. Linda turned to him, her eyes flashing. Don't you dare turn against me too, Robert. I've dedicated my life to this family, to maintaining our status and connections. You can't possibly. Status? I interrupted, my voice trembling with anger. Is that all you care about, your precious status? Well, let me tell you something, Linda. My mother, the woman you looked down on for years, has touched more lives with her words than you ever will with your shallow parties and social climbing. The elderly woman nodded vigorously. It's true. Elizabeth Johnson's books are beloved by millions. She was a true artist, a voice for the voiceless. I felt tears welling up in my eyes, but I pressed on, and you made me leave her funeral for this. You couldn't even give me one day to grieve in peace. The horror of the situation seemed to dawn on the guests. Murmurs of disapproval rippled through the crowd. Linda's carefully crafted image was crumbling before her eyes. I think you owe Claire an apology, Linda, Robert said firmly. Linda's face contorted with rage. Apologize? For what? For trying to keep this family together? For maintaining our social obligations? For being cruel, Jack said quietly. For putting your own desires above everyone else's needs. For never once considering how your actions might affect others. Linda's eyes darted between Jack, Robert, and me. I could see the realization dawning on her face that she had finally pushed too far. Fine, she spat. If that's how you all feel, then perhaps it's best if you leave, all of you. I won't stand here and be insulted in my own home. A hush fell over the room. This was it, the moment everything changed. I looked at Jack, seeing the conflict in his eyes. This was his mother, after all. Despite everything, I knew this decision wouldn't be easy for him. Jack, I said softly, we don't have to. He shook his head, squeezing my hand. No, Claire, we do. Mom, he turned to Linda, his voice firm, we're leaving, and until you can recognize the harm you've caused and make genuine amends, we won't be coming back. As we turned to leave, I heard Linda's voice, small and broken for the first time. Jack, please, don't go. I held my breath, waiting for Jack's response. This was the moment that would define our future. Would he stand firm, or would Linda's influence prove too strong once again? Jack paused, his hand on the doorknob. The entire room seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Jack's hand tightened on the doorknob, his knuckles white with tension. He turned back to face Linda, his eyes filled with a mix of sadness and resolve. Mom, he said, his voice steady, I love you, but I can't keep living like this. We can't keep living like this. Until you're ready to truly change, to see how your actions have hurt us, we need to go our own way. With that, he opened the door, and we stepped out into the cool evening air. The silence behind us was deafening. As we drove home, the weight of everything that had happened crashed over me. I broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. Jack pulled over to the side of the road and held me close. I'm so sorry, Claire, he whispered. I should have stood up to her years ago. I let this go on for far too long. I looked up at him through tear-blurred eyes. What happens now? He took a deep breath. Now we start over, together. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Robert called to inform us that he was filing for divorce from Linda. Her actions at the party had been the final straw in a marriage long strained by her controlling behavior. I should have done this years ago, he told us. Maybe then things wouldn't have gotten so out of hand. Linda, for her part, alternated between rage and desperate pleas for forgiveness. She left countless voicemails, each one swinging wildly between threats and tearful apologies. We didn't respond to any of them. Instead, Jack and I focused on healing. We spent long evenings talking, really talking, for the first time in years. I shared stories about my mother, reading passages from her books and marveling at the depth of her talent. Jack listened, offering comfort and support, free from the shadow of his mother's influence. One evening, as we sat on our porch watching the sunset, Jack turned to me with a serious expression. Claire, I've been thinking, what if we moved, started fresh somewhere new? I blinked in surprise. Move? But your job, our friends. He shook his head. None of that matters if we're not happy. And let's be honest, there are too many painful memories here. I think we both need a clean slate. As I considered his words, I felt a spark of excitement ignite within me. A fresh start, away from Linda's toxic influence and the weight of our past struggles. It was terrifying, but also exhilarating. "Where would we go?" I asked, a smile tugging at my lips. Jack grinned. "Anywhere we want. The world's our oyster." Over the next few months, we planned our move. We decided on a vibrant city on the opposite coast, far from Linda's reach. Jack found a new job at a startup, and I began exploring the possibility of publishing my mother's unpublished works. The day before we left, we received one last call from Linda. Jack put it on speakerphone, his hand gripping mine tightly. "Jack, Claire," her voice was small, lacking its usual commanding tone. I wanted to say goodbye, and I'm sorry for everything. I see now how much damage I've caused. I hope someday you can forgive me." We exchanged a look, years of hurt and resentment warring with the possibility of reconciliation. "It's a start, Mom," Jack said finally. "We need time, but maybe someday." As we hung up, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. It wasn't a perfect ending, but it was a beginning. The next morning, as we loaded the last of our boxes into the moving truck, I paused to look back at our old house. So many memories, both good and bad, were contained within those walls. "Ready?" Jack asked, taking my hand. I nodded, feeling a surge of hope and excitement. "Ready." As we drove away, heading towards our new life, I thought about my mother, about the courage it must have taken her to live a double life, to pursue her passion in secret. I felt her strength flowing through me, giving me the courage to embrace this new chapter. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I knew Jack and I would face them together, free from the shadows of our past. As the familiar landscape faded behind us, I smiled, ready to write the next chapter of our story. The sun greeted me warmly that morning, a rare treat after weeks of dreary weather. My hands, wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee, were still as I stood in the garden, admiring the newly blossomed roses. It was a perfect holiday morning, serene and promising, until the peace was shattered by the sound of a car pulling up in the driveway. Richard, my husband of 10 years, stepped out of the car, followed closely by his sister Anna. They were an odd pair, Richard with his stern-lined face and Anna ever the carefree spirit, albeit with a cunning glint in her eyes. They were laden with bags, their arms straining under the weight. I set my cup down, a sense of unease creeping up my spine. "Richard, what's all this?" I asked, my voice steady despite the alarm bells ringing in my head. Richard's response was blunt, like a sledgehammer to my calm morning. "We're moving in with you from today," he declared, as Anna smirked beside him. I felt the ground shift beneath me. "What do you mean moving in, and why?" Anna's smirk widened. "If you don't like it, Helen, you can always divorce him and leave," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Before I could gather my wits to respond, they barged past me, their footsteps heavy against the wooden floor. My once tranquil living room was quickly cluttered with their belongings. I stood frozen, watching the invasion of my personal space, my sanctuary. Just then, Mia, Anna's 14-year-old daughter, entered the room. Her eyes, a mirror image of her mother's, were filled with apology. Unlike Anna, Mia had always been gentle, a flower struggling to bloom in the shadow of her mother's overpowering presence. I found my voice, albeit a whisper. "Is this really okay? I mean, with Mia and all?" Richard, who had been directing Anna on where to place her myriad of bags, stopped dead in his tracks. His face, usually an unreadable mask, turned pale. Without a word, he dashed out, his phone pressed against his ear. Anna, now left alone to face me, looked as if she might faint. The arrogance had vanished from her face, replaced by a dawning realization of something gone awry. "I can't wait for Richard to come back," I said, my voice stronger now. Anna flinched at my words. "Brace yourself, Anna. The real fight starts now." As I stood there, facing the chaos, a part of me wondered how my life had spiraled into this mess. I was Helen Davis, a 50-year-old accountant, living a life that was more a routine than an experience. My marriage to Richard, once a source of comfort, had become a suffocating trap. Richard and I met at a community event. He was a local businessman 10 years my senior, and I was a volunteer. We connected over shared interests, and before I knew it, we were married. It was a simple ceremony, Richard insisting that anything more was frivolous. From the start, Richard was a traditionalist. He believed in clear roles within a marriage, and unfortunately that meant I was relegated to the background, my opinions and desires secondary to his. "I'll handle the finances and decisions. You just make sure the house is in order," he would say, his tone final. I complied initially. I thought his dominance was a sign of his commitment and care. But as the years rolled by, the charming businessman I married revealed himself to be controlling and dismissive. Our home, once a haven of shared dreams and laughter, had turned into a silent battlefield. I would tiptoe around his moods and his commands, trying to keep the peace. But inside I was screaming for an escape, for a breath of fresh air. That morning, as I watched Anna spread her belongings across my living room, I felt a surge of anger. This was not just an invasion of space. It was a blatant disregard for my existence, my choices. And Richard, the man who had vowed to cherish and respect me, stood silently by, a spectator to his sister's audacity. Anna's eyes met mine, and for a moment I saw a flicker of fear. She knew she had crossed a line, but her arrogance was too ingrained to step back. She was like a parasite, feeding off Richard's affection and my tolerance. "I hope you're ready for the consequences, Anna," I said, my voice calm but firm. Her response was a scoff, but her eyes betrayed her. She knew she had awakened a dormant adversary, and as I stood there, amidst the chaos they had brought into my home, I realized that this was not just an invasion. It was a declaration of war. The sound of Richard's car pulling up again snapped me out of my thoughts. I braced myself for the confrontation, for the battle that was about to begin. The doors opened, and Richard stormed in, his face a mask of confusion and anger. "What's going on, Helen?" "Why is Anna panicking?" he demanded, his eyes darting between me and his sister. "This," I gestured to the mess around us, "is what your decision has led to. Your sister, your house, your rules. But not anymore, Richard. Not anymore." The room was thick with tension, the air heavy with unspoken words and suppressed emotions. Richard looked at me, then at Anna, and a realization dawned on him. He had underestimated me, taken my silence for submission. But as the sun streamed through the windows, casting a warm glow on the chaos, I knew this was just the beginning of my fight for freedom, for my voice. The shadows of retribution were finally lifting, and I was ready to step into the light. Richard's confusion melted into a frown, his eyes narrowing as he absorbed the scene before him. "Helen, this is temporary. Anna needs us," he said, his voice firm, leaving no room for argument. I scoffed. "Temporary? Richard, your sister has brought half her house here. And you," I turned to Anna, "you waltz in here as if you own the place." Anna rolled her eyes, a smirk playing on her lips. "Oh, come on, Helen. It's not like you use this space for anything important. Besides, Richard agrees with me, don't you, brother?" Richard nodded, his allegiance clear. "Anna's going through a tough time. We need to be there for her." I felt a surge of anger. "And what about me, Richard? When have you ever considered what I need?" Richard's expression hardened. "You have everything you need, Helen. A roof over your head, food on the table. What more do you want?" His words stung, and I felt a bitter laugh escape my lips. "I want a husband who sees me as an equal, not just a caretaker for his home and his burdensome sister." Anna snorted. "Equal? Please. You should be grateful Richard even married you. At your age, options aren't exactly lining up." Her words were like a slap in the face, but I stood my ground. "Grateful? For a marriage that suffocates me? For a husband who values his sister's whims over his wife's feelings?" Richard's face reddened, his anger boiling over. "Enough, Helen. You're overreacting. Anna is family." "And what am I?" I shot back, my voice trembling with emotion. "Just a convenient accessory to your life?" The room fell silent, the tension thick and suffocating. Richard and Anna exchanged a look, a silent conversation passing between them. I knew then that I was fighting a losing battle. Richard finally spoke, his voice cold. "Pack your things, Helen. If you can't accept my sister, you can't be part of this family." His words were a dagger to my heart, but I refused to let them see me break. "Fine," I said, my voice steady. "I'll leave. But remember this, Richard. I am not your property. I am a person, and I will not be dismissed so easily." I turned on my heel and walked to our bedroom, my mind racing. As I began packing my things, tears blurred my vision. I had given up so much for this marriage, only to be cast aside for Anna's selfishness. But amidst the hurt and betrayal, a fire ignited within me. I would not let them break me. I would fight back, and I would reclaim my life. As I zipped up my suitcase, I looked around the room that had been my sanctuary. It was time to leave, to start anew. But as I stepped out of the bedroom, suitcase in tow, I knew one thing for certain. This was not the end. It was just the beginning of my journey to retribution. The door slammed behind me as I left the house, my heart pounding with a mix of fear, anger, and a newfound determination. The crisp morning air was a sharp contrast to the stifling atmosphere I'd just escaped. I took a moment to steady my breath, realizing that this was the first step towards reclaiming my life. As I walked, the memories of the last few years played in my mind like a tragic movie. Richard, once my rock, had slowly morphed into an unrecognizable tyrant. His sister Anna always lurking in the shadows, influencing his decisions, undermining me at every turn. I found myself outside Mia's school, the realization hitting me that I hadn't said goodbye. Mia, the one ray of light in the otherwise dark canvas of my marriage. I saw her then, walking out of the school gates, her face a picture of innocence and youth. "Mia," I called out, my voice catching in my throat. She turned, her eyes lighting up when she saw me. "Helen, what are you doing here?" I knelt down to her level, my eyes searching hers. "Mia, I've left your uncle's house. Things have become too difficult." Her face fell, a frown marring her young features. "Is it because of Mom? Did she do something again?" I sighed, hating that she had to be exposed to her mother's toxic behavior. "Yes, Mia. Your mom and your uncle, they've made some decisions that I can't live with." Mia's eyes filled with tears, her voice barely a whisper. "I wish you could stay. You're the only one who listens to me, who cares about what I want." I hugged her, my heart breaking. "I care about you so much, Mia, and I promise I'll always be here for you, no matter what." We stood there for a moment, two souls united in our mutual pain. Finally, I pulled away, wiping her tears. "You need to be strong, Mia. Don't let them change who you are. You're a wonderful, kind-hearted girl, and I'm so proud of you." Mia nodded, a determined glint in her eyes. "I will be, Helen, and I'll come to visit you, wherever you are." As I watched her walk back into the school, a plan began to form in my mind. Richard and Anna had underestimated me, seen me as nothing more than a compliant wife, but I would show them. I would fight back, and I would make them pay for every tear, every moment of pain they had caused me. I walked away from the school, my steps more confident than before. The game had changed, and I was no longer just a pawn. I was a queen, ready to take back my kingdom. I found refuge in a small, unassuming cafe, the kind where strangers become confidants. As I sipped my coffee, the warmth of the mug seeped into my hands, mirroring the growing resolve in my heart. It was there, amidst the quiet hum of the cafe, that I began to piece together my plan. A sudden ring from my phone jolted me. It was Mia. "Helen, you need to come to Grandma's house. There's something you should know about Mom." The urgency in her voice was unmistakable. I paid for my coffee and hurried to the address she had given me. Arriving at the quaint house, I was greeted by Mia and her grandparents, Richard and Anna's parents. The air was heavy with tension as they ushered me into the living room. Mia's grandmother, a stern yet kind woman, wasted no time. "Helen, we've been blind for too long. Anna is in trouble, and it's far worse than we imagined." I sat, bracing myself for what was to come. Mia's grandfather, a man of few words, spoke up. "Anna's addicted to gambling. She's amassed a significant debt, and now she's targeting your home to settle it." The revelation hit me like a tidal wave. Anna's arrogance, her sudden move into our house, it all made sense now. Mia's grandmother continued, her voice laced with regret. "We've enabled her for too long, thinking we were helping. But we were wrong. We're cutting her off financially." I nodded, my mind racing with the implications. "And Richard? Does he know about this?" "He knows," Mia's grandfather said, his voice heavy with disappointment. "But he's too blinded by his need to protect Anna. He's part of the problem." The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, each one fueling my resolve. I stood up, my decision clear. I need to confront them. They need to know I'm aware of their deceit. Mia grabbed my hand, her eyes pleading. "Be careful, Helen. Mom can be unpredictable." I squeezed her hand, a smile tinged with determination. "Don't worry, Mia. I'm not the same person they think they can push around. It's time they see the real me." Leaving Mia's grandparents' house, I felt a strange cocktail of emotions. Anger, certainly, at the betrayal and deceit. But also empowerment, a sense of clarity and purpose I hadn't felt in years. I drove back to the house, each mile bringing me closer to a confrontation I never imagined I'd have the courage to face. But there I was, ready to stand up to the very people who had made my life a living hell. I entered the house without knocking, finding Richard and Anna in the living room. The sight of them, so complacent in their scheming, ignited a fire within me. "Richard, Anna, we need to talk," I announced, my voice steady and commanding. Richard looked up, surprise etched on his face. "Helen? What are you doing here?" "I know about Anna's gambling debts. I know she's planning to use this house to pay them off," I said, cutting straight to the heart of the matter. Anna's face contorted into a sneer. "What are you going to do about it, Helen? Cry and run away?" I met her gaze, unwavering. "No, Anna. I'm going to make sure you both pay for what you've done. To me, to this family." Richard's expression faltered, a hint of guilt flashing across his face. "Helen, Save it, Richard. I've heard enough of your excuses. You chose Anna over our marriage. Now, you'll have to live with the consequences." Anna laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "You think you can scare us, Helen? You're nothing. You've always been nothing." Her words were meant to wound, but they only strengthened my resolve. "I may have been nothing to you, but that ends today. I'm taking back control of my life, and I'll start by making sure everyone knows the kind of people you really are." Richard stood up, a mix of anger and desperation in his eyes. "You wouldn't dare. You know how this will look, the scandal, the gossip." I cut him off, my voice cold. "I don't care about the gossip, Richard. I care about justice, about righting the wrongs you and your sister have committed." Anna's face turned pale, her bravado faltering. "You can't prove anything, Helen. It's your word against ours." I smiled, a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Oh, but I can, Anna. I've been collecting evidence, bank statements, gambling debts, everything. I have more than enough to prove your deceit." Richard's face drained of color. "Helen, please, let's talk about this. We can sort it out." I shook my head. "It's too late for talking, Richard. You made your choice, and now you'll have to face the consequences." As I turned to leave, I left them with one final statement. "I'll be filing for divorce, Richard, and I'll make sure the truth about Anna's debts comes out. You've both played this game for far too long. Now, it's my turn." I walked out of the house, the sound of their panicked voices fading behind me. I had stepped into the battle, fully armed and ready. The game of deceit and betrayal they had been playing was over. It was time for retribution, and I was going to make sure they paid for every tear, every moment of suffering they had caused. The next few days were a whirlwind of legal consultations and covert planning. My lawyer, a sharp-witted woman named Diane, was a beacon of support, guiding me through the labyrinth of divorce proceedings. The day of the confrontation arrived like a storm. I stood outside the courthouse, my heart racing with a mix of dread and determination. Richard and Anna were already there, their faces masks of feigned innocence. As we were called in, I took a deep breath, readying myself for the battle ahead. The courtroom was cold and sterile, a stark contrast to the fiery emotions brewing inside me. Richard's lawyer was the first to speak, painting a picture of a harmonious marriage disrupted by my sudden and unreasonable demands. I listened, my fists clenched, as he spun lies as easily as a spider weaves its web. Then it was Diane's turn. She began methodically, laying out the facts with precision. "Your Honor, the reality is starkly different from what has been presented by the defense. We have evidence of financial misconduct and emotional abuse, all perpetrated by Mr. Richard Davis and his sister, Ms. Anna Davis." Anna's eyes widened, her composure slipping. Richard shifted uncomfortably, his gaze avoiding mine. Diane continued, her voice steady and clear. "We have bank statements showing large sums transferred to Miss Davis's account, coinciding with her gambling debts. We also have testimonies from witnesses who have observed the emotional abuse my client suffered in her marriage." Richard's lawyer tried to interject, but Diane was unyielding. "Furthermore, we have evidence of a plan to sell the marital home without my client's consent to cover Miss Davis's debts." The judge looked over the documents Diane presented, his expression growing increasingly stern. Anna squirmed in her seat, her earlier arrogance replaced by a growing sense of panic. Then came the moment I had been waiting for. I was called to the stand, my heart pounding in my chest. I recounted the years of neglect, the emotional turmoil, and the final straw that broke the camel's back. Their plan to usurp my home. As I spoke, I kept my eyes on Richard and Anna. Richard's face was a picture of defeat, his eyes hollow and resigned. Anna, on the other hand, was seething, her hands clenched into tight fists. The judge finally spoke, his voice echoing in the silent courtroom. Based on the evidence presented, it's clear that there has been significant wrongdoing on the part of Mr. Davis and Ms. Davis. I am inclined to grant the divorce and rule in favor of the plaintiff, Miss Helen Davis. Anna erupted, her voice shrill with anger. This is nonsense. She's lying, all of it. Helen's just a bitter old woman who can't stand to see anyone else happy. Her outburst only served to cement the judge's decision. Order in the court, Miss Davis. Your behavior is only proving the plaintiff's point. I will not tolerate any more outbursts. The gavel came down, and with it, the final blow to Richard and Anna's facade. As we left the courtroom, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The truth had prevailed, and karma had served its course. The fallout from the courtroom was swift and unforgiving. News of Richard and Anna's deceit and the divorce spread through our social circles like wildfire. I watched, with a sense of detached vindication, as their reputations crumbled under the weight of their actions. Richard, once a respected businessman, found his clients and associates distancing themselves. Anna, too, faced her own downfall. The gambling dens she frequented now turned her away, her debts too high and her backers too few. But the true retribution came in the form of their parents' intervention. Mia's grandparents, having witnessed the extent of their children's misdeeds, took decisive action. They cut Anna off financially, a move that left her reeling and desperate. I met with Mia's grandparents a few days after the trial. They welcomed me with a warmth that was tinged with sadness. We should have seen it, Helen, Mia's grandmother lamented. We turned a blind eye for too long. Mia's grandfather nodded in agreement. We're taking responsibility now. Anna will have to learn to fend for herself. And as for Richard, he needs to understand the consequences of his choices. Their resolve was a balm to my wounded heart. They, too, had been victims of Richard and Anna's manipulation, and now they stood with me in seeking justice. The next chapter of retribution unfolded at the final divorce settlement meeting. Richard sat across from me, a shadow of the man he once was. His eyes were hollow, his defiance replaced by a quiet resignation. As the terms were laid out, I could see the realization dawn on him. He was losing everything. His home, a significant portion of his assets, and any semblance of dignity he had clung to. Anna, not present at the meeting, was dealt her blow through legal channels. She was required to undertake a debt repayment plan, a far cry from the lavish lifestyle she was accustomed to. As I signed the final papers, a sense of closure washed over me. I had come out of this battle scarred but victorious. Richard and Anna had been brought to justice, not just by the law, but by the karma of their own making. Leaving the meeting, I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced in years. I was free from the chains of a loveless marriage, free from the suffocating grip of Richard and Anna's deceit. I had lost much in this fight, but I had gained something far more valuable, my freedom and a chance to rebuild my life on my own terms. As I walked out into the sunlight, I felt a smile spread across my face. It was the smile of a woman who had faced her demons and emerged stronger. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I was looking forward to walking it. The days following the divorce were a mix of relief and rediscovery. I had stepped out of the shadow of my marriage, and now the world seemed different, more vibrant, and filled with possibilities. One afternoon, I found myself in a quaint bookstore, a place I had often passed but never entered during my marriage. As I browsed through the shelves, I felt a sense of peace. It was in these small moments I realized that life began to regain its color. The bell above the door chimed, and in walked Mia, her face brightening as she saw me. "Helen!" she exclaimed, rushing over. "I heard about the divorce being finalized. Are you okay?" I smiled, embracing her warmly. "I'm more than okay, Mia. I feel like I've been given a new lease on life." Her eyes sparkled with unshed tears. "I'm so happy for you, and I'm sorry for everything my mom and uncle put you through." "It's not your fault, Mia. You've been one of the few lights in my life these past few years," I reassured her. We sat down in a cozy corner of the bookstore, sipping tea from the little cafe inside. Mia shared her plans for college, her eyes alight with dreams and ambitions. I listened, my heart swelling with pride for the remarkable young woman she had become. Then Mia hesitated, her expression turning serious. "Helen, there's something else. My grandparents, they want to help you. They feel guilty about everything." I shook my head gently. "Mia, they've done enough. Just having their support during the trial meant the world to me." "But they insist. They want to give you a part of the money from the sale of the house. It's only fair," they said. The offer took me aback. Richard and Anna had been forced to sell the house to settle their debts, and now Mia's grandparents wanted to ensure I received my rightful share. After some thought, I accepted. Not for the money, but to honor the gesture of goodwill and closure from two people who had become like family to me. With this unexpected financial security, I began to rebuild my life. I found a small but charming apartment, decorated it to my taste, and for the first time, made a space that was truly mine. I also rekindled old friendships, ones that had dwindled under the weight of my unhappy marriage. My friends welcomed me back with open arms, their support a testament to the enduring nature of true friendship. As for Richard and Anna, they faded into the background of my life. Richard had moved to a different city, a shadow of his former self, and Anna, burdened by her debts and the loss of her family's support, had become a mere footnote in my story. One sunny afternoon, as I walked through the park, I realized something profound. In seeking revenge and justice, I had found something far more important: my own strength and resilience. The journey had been tumultuous, filled with pain and confrontation, but it had led me to a place of self-discovery and empowerment. I saw couples walking hand in hand, children laughing as they played, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel a pang of sadness or loss. I was content, at peace with my past and optimistic about my future. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the park, I reflected on the journey I had undertaken. The road to retribution had been paved with challenges, but it had also brought unexpected blessings. Friendships rekindled, a new sense of purpose, and a deeper understanding of my own resilience. I left the park with a light heart, ready to embrace whatever adventures lay ahead. The chapter of Richard and Anna was closed, but my story was far from over. It was a new beginning, a new chapter filled with hope, possibilities, and a newfound appreciation for the simple joys of life.